You're being live streamed. Right?
We are being live streamed too?
Yeah. You're live right now.
All right.
Behave.
Awesome. Well, welcome. This is the Circling Summit 2014. And we are going to be doing a breakout on circling and developmental psychology and understanding more and more about how developmental psychology works, and also about how we can apply that to circling and what that says about circling. So I'm Ryu, and this is Rob. And so I've been here, I guess, just for the people who are watching. I think I've already introduced myself to most of you. I've been here at the Integral Center assisting, running, facilitating the circling labs that we've been doing twice a week, and also assisting a lot of the trainings, the workshops here, as well as teaching a fundamentals class on circling. So, and
Awesome.
you teach at Naropa, right?
I spent 10 years teaching at Naropa, and now I'm no longer teaching at Naropa, sadly.
Oh.
But I'm now just teach at Harvard with Robert Kegan in adult development. So cool.
Cool. So yeah, so you're the right person to have here.
I think so. I'm excited to be here. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have kind of my agenda is like I guess I'll just give a bit of context. So I was studying circling, and then as part of circling, I was studying nonviolent communication for like a fairly long time. It's like really wanted to understand how like words impact communication, and
you met an asshole like me.
No.
Sorry.
And then I read In Over Our Heads.
Yeah.
As part of the T3 program. That was the recommended reading. And in that book, there's a chapter on relationships. And in the chapter on relationships, he says, like, it doesn't matter if you own your experience. The person's going to interpret whatever you say based on where they're at in terms of how they see the world and how they view the world. And the words actually don't matter. They're not the thing.
Yeah.
Like those words, like owning your experience and kind of nonviolent communication style, technique or models are all kind of expressions of that fundamental way of like viewing the world.
Yeah.
And so after having studied all the NVC, I was like, no way, like what? And I'm like, this seems really important. He's like onto something, and I just spent all this time like going through the book, trying to like read in detail, like really get. And those are, you probably know firsthand how nebulous those going through all those books can be.
It's just a humbling thing, because we can spend a lot of time crafting how skillful we are with our voice and in our language, and how do we structure what we want to say. And there's a lot of development personally in terms of sharpening and getting more precise in how do we articulate ourselves in terms of direct, clear communication. It's like, it's necessary for adults, and a whole bunch of our peers, our adults, simply don't hear what you're saying with that level of specificity. Mm-hmm. So, I could say like, I feel like you're being kind of the typical arrogant male asshole, right now. And, that's just my experience of you. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, but I'm just saying that that's what I experience. Mm-hmm. So it's all I statements. But, if he was in a particular stage of development, most notably like socialized mind or below, and he's going to just interpret that as I just called him a fucking asshole, And, so it's just to give an example of what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Cool. Well, I have like a bit of an agenda, like having you here, of like what I've read through has like so massively impacted my understanding of what circling is, and how to apply that understanding into circling of developmental psychology. So I've been working on a lot of these like ideas or assumptions about like, I think this is like, if we apply those principles, I think this is what it says about circling.
Yeah.
So kind of my agenda is a bit of like wanting to just kind of riff with you, and also just kind of confirm with you like where, yeah, what those assumptions are and like how they land for you. How does it sound for you to hear that? Does it seem accurate? Is it not? So
Let's do it.
cool. And then, yeah, we'll see where that goes. If someone has like something they want to ask or comment, we'll invite that. So just get one of our attention and do that too. So the first thing I want to ask about is like, I keep running into this situation, and if you've heard me talk before, I kind of use this example a lot of where like we're in a circle, and there's someone who's learning to facilitate a circle, and they're being trained to facilitate, and so there's someone there who's a circlee who they're there to get their world, so to speak, and so the interaction usually goes something like, how are you feeling? And I'm like, I feel sad. I'm like, okay, so you feel sad. Cool. And then there's like nothing that comes after that. Right. Like,
And this is the
like,
exchange between the person being circled and the facilitator.
Yeah, like the facilitator's asking that, getting that about the circlee's experience. And it just kind of stops there. And I've seen like numerous variations of this.
Yeah.
And just the idea in developmental psychology seems to be that like I can't hold other people, or I'm only going to hold other people to the degree of complexity and kind of nuance or the complexity of their experience, to the degree that I actually have that for myself and hold my experience that way. So the way I took that was that like the person it doesn't occur to ask like, oh, sad, like, are you grieving? Are you lonely? What is it? Doesn't occur to them to ask the question that would invite more of the richness or the complexity of that experience of sadness out. Like they don't actually do that with their own experience.
Yeah.
I would imagine. So I really started looking at this like circling as a whole as kind of dealing with this issue of like, how do we account for the most complexity of someone's experience as we can and actually hold them in that space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
How does that land so far?
Well, kind of what I'm hearing is there's some interest in how do we actually both encourage complexity or development. I'll use those interchangeably, complexity and development. So how do we encourage it, but also then how do we almost set up the conditions so that we optimally hold as much complexity that's in a circle as possible? Is that kind of
Yeah.
Does that capture it, or what did I miss?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Capture it.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm glad I'm somewhere on the mark there with that.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, here's a kind of question for all of us, but is circling developmentally catalytic? That's kind of that's the first question. Is it developmentally catalytic, and why and how? And then let's flip it on the other side, and how is it not? You know, where does it actually fall short? And I think those two are some interesting, those could be fun to explore.
Yeah.
So I heard a yes, that the microphone's right over there. If you want to, you've got a yes too.
Is this on? A bunch of opinions why it doesn't.
And so we've got some yes and some no out of you. Cool. That's awesome.
I really would love to hear from you, Guy. And these examples that you've given so far, they're kind of toy examples. And like I understand the kind of situation you're talking about. So like a novice getting stuck. Yeah, you're feeling sad. Okay, I got that. Now what? Like, or this like, I feel like you're being an asshole. I'm like, okay, these are like a good circle like isn't going to have those issues. And which doesn't mean a novice circler wouldn't. But I don't really see, like, even if I am, owning my experience fully, which I do when I'm leading circle, even if somebody at a lower stage isn't hearing that I'm owning my experience and is hearing it as an evaluation, even if it's really pristine, like, not just eye language, but actual sensations and all that kind of stuff that we teach, like, it would be it would be a mistake for me to assume that they would get that I'm owning my experience. But I would still express myself that way. As the circler, I still would do it. And I would be open to them totally hearing it as a judgment or evaluation.
Yeah.
And welcoming that also. And this is I think, fundamentally, when done well, it is catalytic, because it actually welcomes, like, this, even if there is a mismatch and they don't understand the verbal structures that I'm using at the stage that I'm at, I can still welcome them up. I guess that's my first response, but I do think it's still fundamentally catalytic.
Yeah. And you know, most, you know, I'll just speak generically. I think most developmental psych cats would agree. And for the reason, if you, as the facilitator, are inhabiting a more complex culture of mind within yourself, and you're the leader of that, and you're actually inviting that into the culture, that it is going to be developmentally catalytic for the people who haven't quite gotten that level yet. Now, we can make an argument that it's only going to help people within a certain range of you. You know, like if they're 2 full stages below, good luck, right? You can be as complex as you want, and you're just shooting way over their heads, so to speak. But certainly if they're in the neighborhood, it's going to actually help. And the sociocultural context is probably it's the most powerful medium for development. It is the relationships that we're immersed in culturally. And at least that's kind of my bias, and I think a lot of people would agree. Certainly, like some of the big pillars in kind of educational developmental psych, like Vygotsky, for example, he's going to say it's totally about the context, like the social and relational context. So that's kind of what I would say in response. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that, or we can kick it over.
No, I'm curious to hear what.
If I can use an example, like just at lunch today, is it cool if I talk about just not specifics?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a moment where you're talking about like something you were feeling, and I had this experience of like I couldn't drop in completely with it, and when I got in there closer, it was like, oh, it's because we're talking about 2 different experiences. And that when you confuse them as one, I feel clogged up with you. And the moment they unclogged, right, now you have like, oh, like how I feel about myself in others' eyes, and then there's like, oh, like I don't get to do that. And they're 2 completely different experiences. And I just imagine that popping those 2 things apart, getting them in front of you, now I have like this whole thing about the line of like, huh, what comes up for me in another's eyes, right? Oh, and also what comes up for me when I don't get to do what I want to do, and seeing those as distinct. So it's like, yeah, a couple of things. For me, circling has taught me how to see. Like, if anything, it's the thing that just really, like, developmentally, as a facilitator, I think what it has is it kind of demands, if you're really going to do it, it requires your attention to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just piggyback that point, because I think that whatever we're consciously engaging with, that tends to elicit more complexity over time. You know, so just the act that you guys have trainings to train the trainers, to bring more attention to the facility and nuance that we bring to this practice of circling, that in itself is catalytic. You know, like, I'm not going to just do it how I used to, right? But I'm going to actually experiment and see if there's some new ways that I can actually show up in this circle. And that's powerful, you know. And I would say that's catalytic for a good, you know, 70% of most adults, you know.
Question I have about it is, so my experience is actually like what helps me be able to make distinctions and see more is actually like reading. Like, reading Heidegger, reading books like that kind of stuff. And there's a big controversy I've noticed. People have really strong feelings about being deeply literate. And my experience is like, it doesn't really put me in my head. It puts me, I could see more, so I can relate to, I have more to relate with.
Yeah.
And I was just curious about, I kind of have my panties in a bun about that one because I'm sick of hearing that one, about the conflict with that.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious what your thoughts are about what is the importance of actually being deeply educated in this kind of stuff, and does it matter?
Well, in terms of, there's the practice of circling, right? And then there's what's the literature around circling. Like in your training, one of the recommended readings was like In Over the Head, and you should get some kind of an award for reading In Over Our Head, just because it was recommended, But, and so what's the literature around it? Because according to kind of the integral model, right, development always starts in cognition. And you kind of bring up this question of education. Education, the root of the word, means to draw out from. Like I'm embedded in something, and through education, real education, not just filling your head with ideas, I actually am drawn out of what I was, and I can now see it as an object. And that's always a conceptual maneuver first, right? So the conceptual nuance, and you kind of said, well, it enables me to see. Like I can actually just see more what's happening. That's development happening. And usually development always happens first as a conceptual move in terms of perspectival flexibility. And then it moves into my own intra-personal relationship. Oh, I can see that in myself, and I have that tendency when I'm circling and when I'm facilitating. And all of a sudden, as soon as I can see that in myself, now it's available to shift into the cultural context. And it's not always that way, but generically speaking, at least this is my bias, is that it's a concept, it's a discernment, right? It's a new nuanced perception. It's not just an idea, but it's a perceptive quality that new features have revealed themselves to you. And then I apply that to myself, and then I apply it to how I'm going to relate to Porcelli, or how I'm going to relate to you guys. And that's where we find that is identity development. That's classic identity development. The cognitive line, the intrapersonal, what's my relationship to myself, and then what's my relationship to other. And reading, just to go back to concept, is essential. It's essential. Right? There's no way around it. If you're not reading things that actually pull your perspective in new ways, there's a good chance you're just not going to develop. Right? It can happen through discourse, right? But there's like opening new pockets in human consciousness, we might say. Not to get too like fluffy and new agey, but they're rare. Like Sri Aurobindo, rare. Heidegger, rare. Like these cats are not every day. And if you happen to get one living in front of you, like buckle up and take vigorous notes, because the kind of clarity that's coming through is simply not able to be captured by most minds, and it actually takes some time to kind of integrate. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff at you guys, and I don't know what's percolating, and yeah.
To me, you just actually described almost exactly what I've noticed, a pattern that happens in circling. I'm like, there's my world I'm getting, and we're driving, and then dissonance, don't see it first, subject object, and then drop into feeling. Like I see the map, right? The map becomes the territory.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I have a new map. As Korzybski would say, it's like I have new feelings because it's usually more inclusive.
Yeah.
Which then relates to then we all feel more like more connected, and then there's this kind of integration of everyone getting more of you. I just like that.
Yeah,
I like
cool.
how you described that.
Totally. Well, I'm curious, what are some of the pieces that you see, like actually circling is holding people back? It's not developmentally catalytic.
Well, I think actually part of it is what I see as a naivety, which is when somebody doesn't understand something, right? They say things like, "You're putting me in my head," or "That's in my, I'm up here." And what I want to do is just stay down in like the level of feeling.
Gotcha.
And actually, the example that you brought up is just a place where just it looks to me like swimming, like circling gets really, I don't know, more like less of an experience of people being deeply seen and more of an experience of being more narcissistically mirrored. Which I think the quality of being deeply seen in my experience is always like, no, I'm seen, i.e. I'm experiencing myself with you beyond my own conception, beyond my own framework. Mm-hmm. So it's more like it gets swimmy. It gets like doing laps instead of.
Yeah.
That's where I kind of see it.
Yeah.
One way.
Cool. I don't know. Do you want to say something, or you want me to just? I can go indefinitely.
Well, can I speak more about the? Can I speak more about some of the ways I think it is developmental?
Oh, totally.
Before
we
we wrap that.
Sure. Yeah.
Or do you want to?
Well, I just wanted to say I'm getting so far of like what you're talking about, like the social context being the main catalyst, and that
So powerful.
we're holding, like we're training people to hold a certain level of complexity so that we can catalyze that in other people, and that they can be brought up to that place. And I feel like it's it seems like really interesting also that we can make all the distinctions, and there's also just something about like that we're holding, like in the space of training people and all that people get to be in that environment where there are other people that are holding a deeper, more complexity, and there's something probably just about that gets transmitted as well as all the distinctions. So that's what I'm getting. But, yeah.
Awesome.
So I want to echo what Guy said about subject-object, because I think that's Kegan's idea of the essence of development, is taking our experience, the water we're swimming in, and zooming out and looking at it. And to me, the process of circling is doing that over and over and over again, and not just looking at it yourself, but having all these people telling you what it looks like, and then looking at that. Mm-hmm. And so just echoing that, if the more that we practice and can bring that into the everyday experience, it is a living meditation. So it's just like, when done right, as you've said. And I think it's like a perfect integral practice. And if I can geek out for a second, because I saw the books that you were holding, to me, there's an invitation to really participate with uncertainty. Of like, I have no fucking clue what's about to happen. I don't know what I'm going to say or what you're going to say. And like, I'm getting more and more comfortable with that and speaking from that. And I think that's a necessary part of development to keep going, as you talk about with elegance. And it's like I'm in for personally, and I think this happens for everyone. It's like the more you circle, the more you see your habits of mind over and over again. And that's the subject thing, but just that habitual reaction, like, oh shit, when somebody asks me a question, I automatically respond. And I don't have to.
Yeah.
I can do anything. So yeah, there's that moment-to-moment awareness. And at its best, I think, there's a sense of like, I am not limited to this self. And it doesn't happen in all circles, but like when there's a really deep field, like I can sometimes feel into this idea of like your emotions and like you sitting in that chair and like us in this space is all like, it's all creating like the experience that I have. And it's not like I'm separate from that in any way. So I think that's like this, it's a perfect developmental practice for the integral community to like keep launching into higher levels of complexity. So that's my rah-rah circling. Now I'm nervous.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, so there's this quality of actually there's some facility of circling that helps us reveal kind of what we once were and becoming something else. So the subject-object shift is occurring, and then there's also kind of this tendency that it might start doing laps, and we're all just simply touring our own needs, interests, and desires. Like if we all just circle together and I bring up my kind of particular interest of mine or desire or need, right? We're just exercising, in Kegan's model at least, the second order, right? The imperial mind, right? And we can get really intimate with it. We can get really vulnerable. We can even be uncertain about what's going to be emergent right here. And if the object that we're working on is needs, interests, and desires, of which probably a shit ton of circling kind of circles this stuff, we're exercising our kind of second order selves, right? And we're operating on it, which means at least we have some third order online, right? Now, if we do circles where we're actually starting to kind of pick up, what's really going on for me is I've got this thing with Porcelli. My wife sends her love to you, by the way. So there's, we might talk about love and affection and actually a lot of respect. And so now all of a sudden I'm not just talking about my own needs, interests, and desires, but I'm actually pointing at the relationship that we have together, but we're kind of stuck, how are we going to carry this thing forward, we see each other here and there, we have amazing conversations, or at least I think we do. It's incredible. The pregnancy between you and I is I bow to it. And where's that going? So all of a sudden we're starting to look at the mutuality, the relationships, and that's now the third order, right? And if we're looking at that as an object, we're exercising our fourth order, right? And we're doing kind of a complex maneuver, because just in this conversation, we could treat this as a circle. This cat has actually just raised, let's look at what circling is as a whole. Not just, a specific practice, but the whole thing. How do we actually look at it? And how does it relate developmentally? What works, what doesn't? So we're now starting to look at circling as an object, right? And that's now we're looking at a particular ideology. So we might say the ideology, one of the core principles is let's all circle Capshaw, and it's let's get his world, right? And imbued in that injunction, and this is kind of where we run into the ceilings of developmental aptitudes. So the injunction of we're going to get his world, right? It actually caps things somewhere in the fourth order orientation. Right? Why? The question is why. I'll volley it to you guys and see what you guys want to say, but that injunction actually caps it. Caps it. But nonetheless, if somebody can bring in an ideology as an object to be circled on, we're definitely going to be exercising some really badass shit. Don't get me wrong. If we're just doing, relationships, this is what's going on in my intimate relationship, this is what's going on between me and you, and now I'm just really pissed off at you, or, whatever it might be, we're kind of muscling our ability to kind of hold and manage our third order parts of ourselves, which is, again, good. And likewise with needs, interests, and desires. So that's kind of one thing that we can kind of chew on, is it's not so much what's emergent, but what's the complexity of the objects that we're working with, and then what's emergent around that.
What's the good one that's really high?
What am I at? 5, right? 5, yeah. You can just call that fifth. Yeah.
What would be an object of fifth again?
So fifth, and we have a little bit of a thread of it, so we've got this ideology of circling, right? And there's the circling world, there's the practices, there's the injunctions, like, all right, we're all going to get Porcelli's world, let's circle him. We're all going to circle Rob, let's get his world. And inside of that is some kind of, they're largely hidden assumptions, and they're all ideologically constructed. And developmental psychology brings this idea that, well, we're developmental beings, right? And so it's bringing in this ideology, and we're actually looking at the intersection of these two things. So we might say that at some level, we at least conceptually have access to kind of some sensibilities in the self-transforming mind, you know, this fifth order. And what we're identified with at that stage, is post-ideological constructs or trans-ideological constructs. And you can get a sense, like I'm deeply ensconced in developmental psych, and, you know, 1 minute I'll drive it over with a truck, you know, like I'll do it soon, you know, like actually, you know, we're not developmental. We're actually just massively fruitional beings, you know, like who you are right now is just a radical demonstration of who you are, you know, and that's it, you know, and there's some merit in playing that out, right? And so whenever we find conflicting ideological underpinnings as objects, we know that we're not inside of them, you know. But a lot of circling, and this happens in any community, whether it's developmental psych, circling, Gestalt, Hakomi was mentioned before. What are some other, like, method of, what's that?
T group.
Yeah, T group. Like, if we're inside of that, we actually belong to its culture, right? And we can't see anything else.
Is that true?
Developmentally, yeah. If you're inside of it and you belong to it, and it is the authority that's governing how you show up, right? If it has you, it owns your ass.
If you're going to get my world, I don't understand the ceiling at fourth order. Like, my world is fucking fluid, and like, we might get it this moment, it'll be different the next, and like,
cool.
How is there a ceiling? I don't understand the ceiling. I don't understand how it owns me. Like, if I'm participating in a circle, that's just a little thing that's happening. Like, it's not the totality of me. That's not
Totally.
the governance of my identity.
Right.
It's just this thing I happen to be doing right in the moment. So help me understand the cap, the ceiling, the fourth order, or how it holds me, or how it might.
Yeah, so that injunction to get your world.
So the injunction to get someone's world assumes separation and autonomy in the developmental language. But I think that that's more of like a marketing term that we use in circling. It's like, oh, you get somebody's world and you can get your world gotten.
And be careful with those, because they end up shaping our relationship to them, you know. But I would say that anything, so any injunction, so I'll push back a little bit and I'll actually hopefully clarify your question. But so the injunction of like, all right, let's now get Casey's world, right? And what it does is it consolidates me over here and you over there. And even that assumption, and maybe it's just marketing, but like, okay, we sit down and that might be all that's holding. It's like, all right, who wants to get circled? Okay, you know, okay, I'm going to get his world. You know, there's an I over here that is going to get you over there, right? And that caps us in fourth order, always. Like, because I'm making some very massive assumptions, and they're rarely ever seen, but they are huge. And the assumption is that I am distinct from you, and that I actually precede like this next moment, right? And that's going to cap us into a particular way of relating.
I know what you're saying. Like, I don't know if that's how it plays out in a circle, right? Like
Totally.
Getting my world includes my relation to you right in this moment. Like, we're co-creating a moment or something.
Cool.
You know, like,
Yeah.
being aware of what's happening now
Yeah.
can lead to not a dissolving of the assumption of separation, right?
Yeah, it might. Yeah. And I think, like, what are some injunctions that that would be more catalytic would be, you know, let's actually co-create our world right now, you know, so that the I isn't so fixed and we're not so located in you, you know. But even the structure of circling that locates one person as the center point, you know, and I'm sure circles have happened where that dissolves and breaks down and it kind of something else is occurring, and when that's happening, you know, you're in a more pregnant kind of cultural space, I would say.
And just so review me on the orders, right? So fourth order is described as?
The self-authoring mind.
And then fifth order is described as?
The self-transforming mind.
Okay.
And so this idea, so inside the ideology of self-authorship is that I actually am creating and authoring my life and my world. And that probably governs a whole bunch of circling, I would say, you know. And that, not always. The cool thing about circling is that there's, you know, there's immense flexibility, which on the strong side, there's tremendous like developmental complexity that can kind of be washed in, and on the other side, it's like it can just kind of run laps indefinitely. But this idea that we can author ourselves from inside, and you know what, let me tune into my body, let me tune into my emotions, let me tune into my narrative, right, that has led me up into this moment. All of that is exercising more of our fourth order capacities, we might say, right? And that's different than, you know, what you're kind of alluding to is like, actually some part of me gets to this precipice and I don't know what's going to happen, right? And that uncertainty, like, it's different. Like, oh, I'm uncertain and now I'm coming into this next moment, right? Is a little bit closer to fourth order versus actually uncertainty is creating who I am right now. And then that's kind of, it's a subtle difference, but it's a world, they're just different worlds. Does that help kind of anchor some things?
It does. I'm loving, like, wrestling a little bit with it. I mean, this is a conceptual stretch, you know, reviewing Kegan and comparing circling and my own experiences with circling and trying to map them and stuff. So this is fun for me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But certainly in terms of, you know, Casey's pointing to us like, hey, there's this thing and it's fluid, it's changing, it's dynamic, and that's me too. Like when I'm doing it, and that is critical, right? And I would say that circling can become more catalytic if it actually picks up this injunction and unpacks it and differentiates people, particularly for you guys. And I mean, you guys are kind of the circling leaders in the world. So you guys have to be able to start coming from more complexity. And that necessitates that you actually are not separate and then entering into this moment, right? But actually, that your subjectivity, your entire sense of self is actually thrust out of immediacy in the moment, and you actually discover yourself with and through and between. You know, there's always an in-betweenness that is prior to autonomy, we might say. At any rate, so we'll keep stretching. But
I have a lot of things I could say, but the thing I think I just I'm getting, or the distinction I think that needs to be just made clear, is that the ceiling in a circle seems to be dictated by the level of development and complexity of the facilitator of the circle. That some people are at third order socialized mind and they kind of inherit this ideology and they just kind of do it, and it's just kind of some people are at I think most of us are at this fourth order and this separateness, myself included. And it does cap that, but I think if the facilitator is coming from that, if we as ourselves develop as our own complexity as facilitators, we are enabling more possibility within the entire experience of the circle and where it can go. I just think that needs to be said. That is not, I don't think it's the practice itself, but I think it's the level of consciousness that's holding the space.
yeah, I think generically I would agree with you. You know, and I think there's some exceptions. You know, greater complexity will show up in somebody that just, you know, you had no idea, And all of a sudden you're like, wait, what the hell was that? They don't even know what the fuck it was, you know? And like, all of a sudden, like, you thought you had your hands on the reins. You thought you were driving this thing, and all of a sudden you discover actually something else is totally driving this thing, and I'm actually along for a ride. And let's see what's going on. In that sense, the typical structure of I'm the facilitator and I'm kind of holding the thing, which is more of a fourth order orientation, and you need it. Like, we don't want to get rid of that, but we don't want to like get people stuck in the facilitator role. And how do we actually facilitate while at the same time simultaneously remain available to be facilitated by something else or someone else? You know, so yes, and like there's that little caveat. You know, like, you know, as a, you know, if I was a facilitator, I'd be really keeping my radar up for, okay, like what wants to come through that actually is going to be facilitating all of us together. You know. Anyway.
I'm loving just reflecting on my own where I start feeling dissonance or uncomfortable with the practice or the culture around it or its limits. And is it catalyzing or not? Like through this conversation, like one that comes to me is it does seem like the way that it's languaged currently, at least the Integral Center's version of it, connects to a lot of people that are in the 3 to 4 fulcrum. Like they're going into or they're amplifying a newfound self-authoring mind. Yeah. And it's kind of an attractor. It's like, oh, I'm leaving, you know, differentiating from parents or differentiating from, you know, the tribe of my upbringing or whatever, and I'm deciding for myself, and I'm reflecting on myself and what you know, there's all these things like you're saying, like emotional self-awareness and, you know, this past history and reflecting on your own structure and history and how you got here. Yeah. And it's super cool. Like, I think there's a magnetic attractor that circling culture and authentic relating culture has for those kind of in that vicinity on the developmental ladder. But when I start feeling like it's limiting is when it does feel like this narcissistic echo chamber. And it seems like maybe that's an error mode, so to speak, of that fourth order mind. I'm not sure, but like it's like, yeah, I just want constant reflection, or now I want to just like, it's like you're bulking up this thing, this self-authoring thing, and it's like, I need to decide what's right for me, and I need to discover what's right for me through reflection from you, so I can make better choices about what I want and how I'm going to get it in life, and you're here in my circle to help me become more self-aware of my blind spots, so I can use that to like go get more of that, you know, and like, yeah. And it feels, that's when it starts feeling like a limitation of the culture, or the culture itself is becoming this kind of echo chamber for people at that fulcrum, and like, yeah. And where I feel it frustrating too is sometimes, and I'm thinking about doing a little lightning talk on this, is it becomes a little insular. It becomes like, now we're all here doing this thing, and I get why, because you're saying that social cultural context is one of the strongest deciding factors in development. But then there's some part of me that wants it to be like, I want it to go out. I want it to reach more people. I want people to be able to do that in whatever social cultural context that they're in. And I don't know if this requires fifth order or what, but like this is just some of my thoughts on this conversation so far. And I would love to hear your reflection and riff off it.
Totally, and then I'll volley it back to you. Sure. Hopefully we've kind of unpacked some of your initial question. And, well, yeah, so there's a couple layers of narcissism, you know, that we've got to keep our eye on. You know, one is, you know, just me getting my own needs, interests, and desires met. Like, whenever we're doing that, we're exercising fairly young parts of ourselves. And if that becomes the most important thing, we can actually send people in the wrong direction. You know, it's actually not in your best interest for you to take really pristine care of yourself right now. Like you probably don't hear that. Like actually stop it, shut up, and take care of the people around you. Like that's it. That can be just as catalytic developmentally for some people. Particularly in that like 2-3 transition. Like, whoa, time out there. I can see you're a little bit weak on your social skills, right? And you actually really, it helps you to have everybody focus on your needs, interests, and desires, and that's where your anxiety gets lowered. And you're finally like, oh, thank God, like finally the world's paying attention to me. And that's like nice, right? But, how do you give them a good swift kick in the ass and say, actually, what you should be doing is attending and just taking care of Maya and taking care of the people around you, And so that's kind of one thing is and this is kind of my bias, is that circling, it thrives in terms of a passive receptivity to what somebody brings, and its weakness is actually inserting and like, as a facilitator, I'm just going to tell you, Casey, what's up. I'm going to just tell you what you need to do and where you need to go. Like that's, at least my understanding is that's kind of like no-no territory. Like you're not supposed to do that, And actually, like if you're going to be really developmentally catalytic, sometimes we need really, really receptive facilitators, and then sometimes, at least if I kind of look at like where can circling go, it would be very insertive. Like, all right, I'm actually going to play the trump card here. As a facilitator, you need to start steering your attention towards this, and just notice what you discover when you start doing that. Just as valuable about getting somebody else. Then there's also the narcissism that really kind of coalesces around third order, and I'll come to you in just a second, which is the purpose of life, the guiding mission is intimacy, it is reciprocity, it is about connecting, it's about taking care of each other, and it is gorgeous. Like it's so good for humanity. Like third order, like if you get to third order, you clear like 90% of mental illness. So like let's acknowledge it does amazing things, but it gets consumed in its own culture. And the purpose of everything is about us connecting, right? And then it's like, but why are we connecting? Because it feels good. Because we feel connected. We feel intimate. Yeah, we get lots of oxytocin. There's like even some dopamine, because like when we just touch a lot, and then that leads to some good sex. It becomes the end goal, right? And if we purchase that, right, that is a dangerous thing. I'll just say that, And so I'm as always, I'm just thrilled that you've got your eye on it, Because if we reinforce that culture, right, it's lacing great cultural cohesion and will help people kind of enter in, but it can really get people snagged up. Particularly, and 80 to 90% of adults are in this kind of 3-4 transition, and we've got to ask ourselves, what is the ultimate goal? What is the ultimate trajectory? Like Zen has a very specific trajectory towards liberation, you might say, or enlightenment, or however we want to frame it. Like, but what is circling's ultimate aim? Because if it's just relating for relating, we're actually dulling down what we're actually here to do together. At least that would be my bias. You, and then I'm gonna. You're gonna come back to you.
I'm enthralled. I'm just like getting. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have something, or?
Sure. Just like a nuance. So that I keep thinking about a pattern I think I'm seeing of those places where it pops open, right? That place where it's like, whoa, something just happened here, and like like everyone's consciousness went up, like, you know, a tier or something like that. It's surprising, and it happens like an instant. Or in these moments, it devolves, or is unsatisfying. It seems like it has something to do with double binds. Like,
Yeah, they suck.
but it's interesting that I have to say that those have gotten like more and more interesting to me. Of like, okay, if, for example, like, use your example. Well, also kind of tailed onto that as well is what you were talking about. Like, okay, we're just going to keep swimming here if we just keep confirming each other and having that, like, having our needs be met and taking care of each other that way. There's the thing of like, look, motherfucker, like, come on, like, fucking clean your bathroom, like, or you know, get out of yourself or something like that.
Yeah.
I would have to say mastery is actually relating to the circle and the circling in such a way that they actually see their own developmental level as an object. And it's very rare that I've actually seen that work, of that kind of penetrating thing work. And I think why, in my view, is because it's like circling inevitably seems to bring up the narcissistic wound more than anything I've fucking seen.
Yeah.
It's like it's like a lot of humiliation and all the places we weren't mirrored and all that kind of shit comes up, which is cool, right? And I think that that's part of the draw of the nurturing part of it, which is like, oh yeah, we all like have this shameful thing that we desire that we didn't get met, which is like to be seen, right? And to be mirrored and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then there's this like, this other place of where we get to this place of like, where I see is like something like, yeah, but like if I don't get my, all right, I'll help you, but if I help you, what's going to happen to my needs? Right? If I don't have my needs, and that whole kind of tension, and where I've seen circling really have kind of make those leaps is just everyone being drawn into the frustration of that tension and not letting up from it. And then it seems like this, like the field or something kind of just goes boop, and it evolves.
Yeah.
Or unskillfully, it seems like there's that bind and everyone tries to solve it and they get into arguments and it devolves and someone's blamed.
Yeah. Yeah, Maya and I we just spent a week doing facilitation training. And, you know, one of the core competencies that we look at is holding a group in incoherence. You know, so out of coherence and holding them there for creative novelty and for the emergence. And it's a high art. It's a really high art, you know, because you're right. Like, it's uncomfortable, there's discord, and it's got two directions to it. And if you were a betting person, you know, you'd be wiser to bet on the de-evolution of things than the evolution of things. But, you know, magic happens. Magic happens. But you kind of cruised across something that I'll just offer briefly, and that we don't want circling to start to explicitly focus on developmental stages. We want to focus on their aptitudes. What are they capable of? Because development, we're kind of swimming in this like narcissistic conversation about our development or my development. Like, it could be taken that way. And development is not for you. It's not for you. It's always for something else. And so as you develop and you get more objects, and we create more culture that is more complex, and it actually invites more complexity amongst us, it's not about us just getting more developed. You know, feeling good about myself. You know, I had a little, post-conventional opening today, a little post-autonomous visitation, like that thing, wasted time. So we want to focus on the aptitudes, not the stages. The stages, they exist on the map, right? But the territory is a display of competencies that actually have a functional action towards something. And so when somebody reveals a new competency, we could hit pause and kind of do some developmental stuff. And that might be nice, but it'd be better to just, leave the stages out of the conversation and actually just, you know what, the capacity that just came up, I think that's going to serve you and a whole lot of people. So if we really kind of zoom in on the competencies and capabilities, and less on kind of the categorical stage, as facilitators, at least that's what I would kind of encourage you guys to go towards.
I just want to make sure I hear you right.
Yeah.
So would you say that, for example, if I am in a circle with a variety of developmental stages, and we come to the capacity of truthfulness, and am I understanding you right that staying with that capacity where somebody is at their edge of development, being truthful about whatever, at whatever stage, if we can stay with the capacity of truthfulness, that's the development that, or the push, or the capacity that will move that person forward wherever they are?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what you were saying?
Well, truthfulness shows up at like third order.
Oh, let's use another one, for example.
Or go
Just,
ahead.
I don't know. You say one that's
Well,
fourth or fifth order.
I'm not quite sure I'm following what you're asking, but you were saying like it's like you stay there and actually invite or be with the capacity that's emerged. Now it sounds like you're wanting to clarify about like staying, what you mean by like staying there with that capacity, or is that what you're talking about?
yeah, so the truthfulness, we might say, like it happens all the time. Like you guys, Casey didn't like something I said. It's like, Rob just got a little too heady, that whole thing. He's just way too abstract. It wasn't very clear, But the way that he says it, it's kind of in it's a little under his breath, and he leans in and he's telling Maya this, after we're finished, it's okay. And what he's doing is creating contact by sharing kind of a secret. This isn't, I'm not going to broadcast this to everybody, but I'm going to let you in on my world a little bit, And it's like, I just, my particular need or interest wasn't quite aligned with where Rob was going. And you might say, I really appreciate your truthfulness. Like when you are truthful about what you really need, like that actually makes me feel, I feel you more. I get you more, and I really want to appreciate that. So that kind of highlighting that capacity to actually reveal what you really want in a more private and discreet way is like great.
Yeah.
Now we don't want to necessarily say, and that that's a great exercise, of your socialized mind, like awesome, that doesn't really matter so much as the capacity.
Right. That's what I meant.
But we can take truthfulness and Casey might come to you and say, Rob and I's relationship is distant. We're always trying to get burritos, but it just never fucking happens, right? And so now he's being truthful about the interpersonal relationships, and it's like, but I just wonder, where is Rob in terms of, does he really, really care about me and really love me? Because I just don't feel him outside of here. That might be a critique, and it's truthfulness again, but it's on a whole different layer, And then there's truthfulness about, kind of our ideological assumptions around circling. And at each point, we want to highlight the capabilities. What does it actually do? As opposed to, let's just check that off as oh, that's a nice 5. Good fifth order capacities, But to give people, and this is the important piece, people to have a lived experience, an experiential narrative, that's different. I usually am not truthful with other people, and now I am, and it feels different when I am. And that sense of felt texture in the body and in the mind equally is incredibly important for development. Because when across the board, if you just have conceptual development and it does not enter into your lived first person experience, and it doesn't enter into your relationships, it will erode your well-being.
I'm getting a lot. I'm probably going to watch this over again and then get even more.
Let me know what you find.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And I really agree with what Porcelli said about like feeling myself coming into circles and other people coming into circles with like, I need you to mirror back to me my blind spot so that I can be more in myself and get what I want or whatever it is that I need. So trying to use it kind of in that way. And I'm curious what would be an injunction that we could actually take into a circle that would actually have us go from out of like that autonomy into that, like, what is it that's the unknown, or like what is it that's facilitating us, or like what would we bring, or what would we kind of begin to pay attention to or notice, such that we could start to be accessing that.
Well, what comes up for me is to stop circling. Because just the concept of okay, now we're going to circle. And every single one of us has different assumptions about what that is. But what if we create a sphere? Let's sphere, people. Let's sphere, and actually the injunction is we have no fucking clue what's going to happen. And there is no facilitator. Or maybe there is. Or maybe, I start facilitating and there's a hijack, and Maya takes over, that injunction of let's actually push circling into new territories. And in order to do that, we need to hit pause and actually just, see what happens, And so that's kind of one. And the other one is it's very simple. It's, have a look at what's happening. Be immaculately curious. Allow yourself to be captured by curiosity, we might say, that has no reference point. That's probably one of the most catalytic developmental postures that your body-mind can inhabit. This guy might have a few things to say about the cultivation of such a posture.
Awesome.
That's fine.
Thanks.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah.